Welcome to Mountain Strong. Today our family has driven south from Fairbanks, Alaska, all the way down the Richardson Highway to Glen Allen, and then past Glen Allen to a place called Copper River. And we're staying the night in Copper River even though we're only 3.5 miles, even though we're only 3.5 hours from Anchorage at this point. It's a good opportunity to stop when you're traveling with kids ages 3 and 1. You always look for ways to break up the trip, and this was a good opportunity to do so. This is a very pretty place, getting a chance to look across the way here at the Wrangell St. Elias National Park. I think that's actually Wrangell Mountain if you can see it in the distance there. And we're here at sunset, which of course means we're here at about 11 o'clock at night and getting to enjoy the sunset here. But there's a reason why we're having a look at a sunset because it's very appropriate for the psalm that we're going to be having a look at together today, Psalm 71. Let's go ahead and read that now. In you, O Lord, do I take refuge. Let me never be put to shame. In your righteousness deliver me and rescue me. Incline your ear to me and save me. Be to me a rock of refuge, to which I may continually come. You have given the command to save me, for you are my rock and my fortress. Rescue me, O my God, from the hand of the wicked, from the grasp of the unjust and cruel man. For you, O Lord, are my hope, my trust, O Lord, from my youth. Upon you I have leaned from before my birth. You are he who took me from my mother's womb. My praise is continually of you. I have been as a portent to many, but you are my strong refuge. My mouth is filled with your praise, and with your glory all the day. Do not cast me off in the time of old age. Forsake me not when my strength is spent. For my enemies speak concerning me. Those who watch for my life consult together and say, God has forsaken him. Pursue and seize him, for there is none to deliver him. O God, be not far from me. O my God, make haste to help me. May my accusers be put to shame and consumed. With scorn and disgrace may they be covered who seek my hurt. But I will hope continually, and will praise you yet more and more. My mouth will tell of your righteous acts, of your deeds of salvation all the day, for their number is past my knowledge. With the mighty deeds of the Lord God I will come. I will remind them of your righteousness, yours alone. O God, from my youth you have taught me, and I still proclaim your wondrous deeds. So even to old age and gray hairs, O God, do not forsake me, until I proclaim your might to another generation, your power to all those to come. Your righteousness, O God, reaches the high heavens. You have done great things, O God. Who is like you? You who have made me see many troubles and calamities will revive me again. From the depth of the earth you will bring me up again. You will increase my greatness and comfort me again. I will also praise you with the harp for your faithfulness, O my God. I will sing praises to you with the lyre, O Holy One of Israel. My lips will shout for joy when I sing praises to you, my soul also, which you have redeemed. And my tongue will talk of your righteous help all the day long. For they have been put to shame and disappointed who sought to do me hurt. There are a few keys to grasping the meaning of this psalm, and if you walk through the text with me, you're going to see what this psalm is describing. Notice how the author speaks about having done things from his youth in verses 5 and 17. Typically when people say, from my youth, it implies what? Well, that they're older, right? He says in verse 9, do not cast me off in the time of old age. That doesn't imply that necessarily he's reached old age, but then you're given that confirmation in verse 18, even to old age and gray hairs. The author of this psalm is writing from the sunset of life. He's writing from the sunset of life, and as you consider this psalm without considering why he is writing or why he is given inspiration to write, you're seeing a picture of really a beautiful life. Even one that needs to be considered before we consider the problem that prompted the writing of this psalm. In verses 1 through 3, you find this truly interesting part of the psalm that actually, once again, just like Psalm 70, just like Psalm 53, appears to be a repetition of an earlier psalm. Compare verses 1 through 3 of Psalm 71 with Psalm 31, 1 through 3. And again, you'll notice differences there. The key difference there is in this phrase that's inserted in verse 3, to which I may continually come you have given the command to save me. And you get the sense as though the author was aware of that statement in Psalm 31. We've all along said that the second book of the Psalms, which you can see the last video where I discussed that a little bit, the second book of the Psalms seems to have been compiled, or maybe even the Psalms within it written after the first book of the Psalms. And so he's reflected on that statement in Psalm 31, and that's become his life. That's who he is. And so the idea of continually coming to God is a part of the very fabric of his being. He describes that God is one to whom he may continually come, and one who has given that command to save him. And he knows that about his God. And so he knows he's his rock, and so he can come to him with his present problem, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But again, a beautiful life is one that is comprised of a person who's taken Scripture on board and is behaving as though it's true. In verse 5, he is a person who says, my hope and my trust has always been on God. From my youth, I've been trusting on God. And what a beautiful picture of life that is, to trust on God throughout one's life. In verse 6, he has leaned upon God, and he's been offering continual praise to God. Again, the beauty of this person's life. In verse 17, he was taught from his youth, and he is still proclaiming. It's so sad when people, they get to a point in life, and I actually heard a man once say how he had been churched to death. He just had enough of church. He only wanted to come on Sunday mornings, and only then, really only when he wanted to, because he'd had enough of it. But the psalmist says, I haven't had enough of it. I've had it from my youth up, but I'm still proclaiming. And in fact, he says in verse 8 that his mouth is full of praise all day. And to what extent? Well, in verse 14, notice how he says, I will continually hope in you and will praise you yet more and more. And so his life has been one of growing praise, growing hope, growing trust in God. And what a beautiful picture of life that is. In spite of the beauty of this person's life who authored this psalm, he's facing difficulty. And so he's not writing this psalm from a standpoint of kind of basking in the life of faithfulness after having lived a good life. He's approaching the end of his life, and he's facing some difficulties. In fact, in verse 4, he finds himself in the hands of the wicked. He sees himself in others' eyes as a portent in verse 7. That's not a common word. A portent is an ominous warning, a warning of something coming in the future. And so maybe people are looking at him and saying, instead of, I want to live like him and be like him when I get older, they're looking at him because he's being taken advantage of. He's being approached and attacked in his old age, saying, I don't want to live a life like that. And the psalmist hates that. He hates that that's the impression that the life of faith is being given because of where he's at. And so specifically then in verses 10 and 11, in his old age, people are taking advantage of him. His enemies are speaking concerning him and saying, God has forsaken him, he's old, he's alone, and we can take advantage of this circumstance or this situation. Does that sound familiar? I've known, sadly, many older people who have been preyed upon by their children and by their grandchildren, sometimes willingly, sometimes unwillingly. They've been preyed upon because they were too weak and feeble to do anything about it. But the beauty of this psalm is that even if people attack us in old age, even if they are against us in old age, there is one who is never against us, and the psalmist realizes that. He realizes that because, again, of that beautiful life he has lived. And so what does he do when people are trying to take advantage of him? Does he give up? Does he despair? Does he complain? I know a lot of older people, they reach that point in life and it just seems like they're complaining all the time. They're complaining about people taking advantage of them. And I know it's easy for me to say as a young person, but I try to take note of these things, take stock of these things and say to myself, I don't want to be like that when I get older. I want to be like those godly examples of people who, in spite of pain and in spite of people perhaps mistreating them, are still portraying faithfulness and godliness and love and trust, and praise continually that increases. And so again, this person, he has lived this beautiful life. And what does he do when he faces this trouble? He prays in verses 12 and 13. Now that would be the easy lesson of this psalm. Obviously, if you're older and you're being taken advantage of course, pray to God about it. That's what the psalm is teaching you to do. But you know that already. And so what's there for the rest of us, and perhaps even for the person in old age? Well, the first lesson that I want to think about is the fact that God is a rock. But he is a rock to those who continually come to him. I love that addition there in verse 3. The fact that he's reflected upon that God is there to continually come to. He has continually come to him in his life. And I'm going to tell you something about that if you want to experience God as a rock, you've got to keep coming back. As long as God is only a bit player, like in a play, how there are the main cast and then the supporting cast and supporting cast, and then the bit players, those who just kind of come on for a scene or two or something like that. If God is only in a scene or two of your life, or if He's only in a small portion of your life, you're never going to see Him as a rock. You're never going to experience what it is to trust in Him and to develop an abiding hope because of the trust you've placed in Him and how you've responded to His commands and done what He has asked. And so God is a rock to those who continually come. But two, as I think about the lessons of this psalm, I realize that there is more to do in old age. The reason he's going to God as a rock is not just because he wants this problem to be over. Remember how he is describing his problem, and he says that he's a portent? He doesn't want to be a portent. He doesn't want people to look at the life of faith and say that you get terrible things to happen to you when you've lived the life of faith when you're in old age. And so he says, no, I want to continue to praise my God. I'm here for a reason. And I wish, I've seen old people do this, but I've seen older people not do this. I wish all old people would realize that they're here for a reason. God doesn't just want them to spend their days going to doctors. I know that takes a lot of time when we're older, but we're not here just to pad the doctor's wallets. We're here for a purpose. We're here to do something. Maybe that is simply to receive the blessings of others, to learn humility, to learn to be a receiver and allow others the opportunity to give. But more often than not, if we still have our mind about us, if we still have our tongue that's working, there's a wonderful opportunity to show forth the praises of Him who's called us out of darkness into His marvelous light. I love how the psalmist says, I want to get through this so that I can show God's praise. I want to remind people of your righteousness and how you are righteous alone. And he says in verse 16, he wants in verses 17 and 18 to be able to proclaim His power, God's power, to the next generation and to all those who are going to come after him. He says, I have more work to do. I think of Caleb after he had wandered in the wilderness and he had engaged in some of those initial conquest fights. He's 85 years old. He said, give me this mountain. Give me this mountain. 85 years old, and he said, I still have strength. I still have something to do. Give me this mountain. And I wish more people would approach old age that way. And so the lessons again, that God is a rock to those who continually come to Him. There is more to do in old age. But number three, that faith rises out of experience. How do you know you're going to make it through your struggles? How do you approach the end of life when your body is failing you, when your strength is gone, as it says in verse 9, your strength is spent? How do you maintain a sense of dignity and a sense that I'm going to get through this when you know that you yourself are not going to be able to work out your escape from that problem? Well, you have to have experienced again God as a rock. You have to have lived that life of faith. He says in verse 19, speaking of God's righteousness, how it reaches to the heavens, he says, you've done great things, you who have made me see many troubles and calamities. Now, why does he mention that? Because he then says, well, you will revive me again. The fact is that the life of faith gets easier as you walk it longer. And even though we face a lot of difficulties in old age, I don't know from the standpoint of experience, but I know from the standpoint of having seen my brothers and sisters in Christ and people in my own family getting older, you experience a lot in old age. But you can have confidence in old age because God has brought you through calamities. He's going to take you through the valley of the shadow of death too. He says, you will increase my greatness and you will comfort me again in verse 21. And I love how the faith that has characterized his life, his beautiful life as we've seen, allows him to say in verses 22 and 23, I'm going to praise you. And then this powerful statement of faith in verse 24. He says, my tongue will talk of your righteous help all the day long, again committing to do his part, for they have been put to shame and disappointed who sought to do me hurt. Has that happened in the course of writing this psalm? Has that happened? Well, probably not. But he sees it through faith. He knows it's real. He knows what God is capable of. He knows it because he's experienced God as a rock throughout his life. He knows God is going to carry him through this problem and that he's going to have that opportunity to sing God's praises once again. He's been doing it every day. He's going to keep on doing it. What a beautiful life and what a beautiful prayer. I hope that this is helpful to someone out there, but I hope if nothing else, if you're not in this situation in life, this is where we want to be. those of us who are younger looking at this psalm. May God bless us to be like this, and may God bless you today.